You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lalana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And today we're talking about Part 1, Chapter 37 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate. And today we are moving on. Viktorov finally gets his orders to be deployed, maybe to the front line, still unclear to them. But more importantly, rather than just the getting ready of all these soldiers to get and head out towards the front line, we have an interesting little incident, which even though we haven't talked about this, I'm fairly certain is going to be the main focus of what we're talking about today, of a soldier, one of the pilots making an anti-Semitic remark to another pilot, and that leading to an argument which the Jewish soldiers then blamed for. So do you want to start there? Or is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we got to that kind of, for me, the nucleus of the chapter?
No, I think that's kind of where I wanted to just kind of quickly talk about, because I don't know. It all sort of leads into that. The beginning of the chapter is sort of just the story of an officer who is not particularly popular because of how he handled a certain interpersonal incident, shall we say. And then it also is rolled into more of this anti-Semitism later throughout the chapter. And it kind of shows us how people use it as just, an excuse. You don't like someone, oh, they happen to be Jewish. Okay, well, then that's kind of compiled, and it kind of builds and builds and builds until it spills over into the sort of like borderline violent incident. Oh, it might have been violent. I don't know. I think there were some punches thrown, but it wasn't a huge one, I guess. But so yes, this main crux of the chapter was very interesting, because you see something that everybody recognizes is wrong as it's happening. Everybody recognizes that the Jewish pilot is being antagonized clearly for that fact, in quite a nasty way. And the resolution is that he is in trouble because he's, how should I say? It's transferred from this sort of level of personal conflict maybe onto the, as they say, the level of politics, as the commissar talks about how this is an issue that we're not really respecting the friendship of the peoples. It's a term that was kind of used pretty widely at this time and throughout the Soviet Union as sort of a, I don't know how to say, like sort of a propaganda tool, which we'll get into this more in our long episode because it's pretty important. But that's basically it. It was kind of a difficult one to explain. There's kind of a lot of, I don't know, you say a lot of nuance with it.
Right.
I don't know. What did you think about it?
Yeah, definitely. Basically what you said, but at the same time, there's also a lot of layers too, right? We have obviously talking about Korol, the pilot who is antagonized, but also there is the political officer who then goes on to reprimand him, Berman. Berman's also Jewish. And, that's kind of where we get into talking about, Jewish identity, where Berman mishandles a rape allegation, which was not really an allegation. It was a rumor that had started spreading. And basically, people are like, well, he's, they kind of get into over Berman, and Viktorov, who kind of says like, well, it's, they're rough types of every nationality almost stepping in for Berman. And, the rest of the guys kind of get on him for it. And they're almost do this thing like, well, obviously we don't hate all Jews. Karol, this pilot, like him, he's a great guy. And, he's like, he's not even Jewish to me. And then Viktorov kind of is like, oh, so if you like them, they're not a Jew. Which that one came from the heart for me looking at that. Like that was.
Yeah, that was a good zinger, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like that was so familiar, just like talking to, I've talked to people from Eastern Europe who are their Jewishness only is invoked when they're suddenly in other, right? I had a boss she was Ukrainian Jewish, and she recalled the story to me one time how when she's like 13, there's this guy like really going after her, and she turned him down. He started like, abusing her. He's like, yeah, you're even like verbally being like, well, whatever, you're just a stupid Jew. And she's like, oh, now I'm a Jew. Before I was, all these other things. And
Hmm.
so like that line to me from what conversations I've had came from the soul, really. But also, so you've got this setup where you're like, oh, you've got this Berman. He's that the this Jewish person we all don't like because he's obviously he's like that because he's Jewish, and we've had enough of that. But then Karol, who's set up as like, oh, he's the one we really like. Obviously, you wouldn't want anyone else with you on a combat mission or something. But then they still get in with it over him, and and so they antagonize him. He is still then gotten in trouble by Berman, and still the outcome, even though he was already blamed unfairly for what had happened. The comment from Solomatin, the guy who had started the whole thing, is, well, you see that if that had been anyone, if it hadn't been, if Karol hadn't been Jewish, then they would have gotten a harsher punishment. So there is two levels to me. One, on one level, how much they like you is conditional on you being in their good graces at that moment. At the moment it suddenly is you're no longer in their good graces, then again you will become Jewish as a pejorative. And when you're not, you will be not Jewish. And of course, no matter what you do, no matter how much something is unfair against you, well, obviously the situation would be worse if you weren't Jewish. So you've got these, I think, this really great treatment, this really great psychology of anti-Semitism here. This very casual. On one hand, we've got the Nazi violent, mass death machine of this, but then also Grossman's exploring the everyday. Solomatin is obviously not going to go off and engage in mass murder of Jews, but you don't have to be a mass murderer in order to engage in these behaviors every day, which makes that environment worse or ostracized or whatever.
I think it's not just about like, will you go out and do violence, but it's also the rhetoric that
Yeah.
enables it. And him kind of talking like that, and the way he's able to egg on and kind of get his, who we presume are ethnic Russians, onto his side just so quickly based on nothing, more or less, just based on, uh, really not much. Kind of shows you how that happens, and how it sort of puts the hysteria from the doctor's plot that happens later than the plot action in the book, but around the time that Grossman is
Mm.
writing, into a perspective as to, um, just I don't know. It's really complex because you'd think that witnessing violence on this scale would give the people who witnessed it sort of some, I don't know, some almost like resistance to that happening again within their own society. And yet it does within the time that Grossman has gone from, documenting this to then writing about it within that relatively short time span. It's starting to happen again. And it's kind of amazing, really, that he's able to depict it so kind of quickly in this chapter. A certain like mentality that's just, I don't know. He captures it so well.
So well. And I also want to zoom in on Berman and how he reacts too, because so we don't really have any insight into Berman as a character. So I don't want to like explain. I don't want to say too much about what this person is feeling, but right, the attitude towards what Berman does is that, oh, he would have, if Karol hadn't been Jewish, he would have given him a harsher punishment. Which of course that's a false thing to say. As noted, basically Berman didn't even have to go down that much of that treatment of Karol anyway. Could have been pretty easy to, at multiple levels, for, first of all, the guy who kicks it up to Berman to be like, it's not a big deal. I don't even care about curse, whatever. I do that all the time. But he's in Berman's bad graces at the moment, so okay, kicks it up to Berman, and then Berman makes it a political issue, which he doesn't have to, and even the guy who kicks it up to him seems a little surprised. And so possibly we have here this case of Solomatin earlier mentions, like, oh, I've had enough of these Samuel Abramoviches. They all look out for each other. They're holding us. We're as if at the same time pulling together like all other as presumably ethnic Russians and being like they're the ones holding us out, obviously, and possibly from the position of speaking of someone like being a minority in a space which is not full of people like you. Sometimes when you are treated with that attitude, that then leads to like a disconnect with people who everyone assumes like, oh, there's an instant connection between you two, and like the minority experience is like you might know that, and you're like, well, I'm purposely going to specifically avoid that, be tougher, avoid this association because people expect me to have this instant connection, so I'm purposely going to go out of my way to avoid that. Maybe be harsher on this, but of course that doesn't matter. The attitude will always be, no matter how much you understand that everyone else thinks that there's some kind of inside network, no matter what you do, they're going to keep thinking that. And so I think the tenuousness of Berman's position, although not front and center in this chapter, I think could also be read into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very complex.
Yeah.
I was really struggling to kind of write about this chapter just because even just tracking the sort of subtleties of everyone's character in relation to the sort of boiling point of the conflict was difficult for me.
Yeah, for sure. It's
and trying not to like do it to make sure that I'm doing it justice writing about it, right? Because I think it's it's hard when every day you feel like you're saying this is an important chapter, but they really almost all feel important. Speaking of important chapters, tomorrow presumably will be important because every day with Grossman is a gift, an important gift to us. It's not funny, Cameron.
I like that phrase. Every day with Grossman is a gift
to us.
Okay, well, you wake up tomorrow and you think about that gift that you've been given by Vasily Grossman, and I guess you'll hear from us again soon.